Alright, so I'm Kelsey. Chapter 12 of the Ladykillers, on Farewells. It's where the gang is, they're trying to escape with the loot without drawing too much attention to themselves. Here's my process work for Mrs. Wilberforce. I started with the triangle and circle, and I didn't like how the edges were pointed, so I moved to a rectangle because I could curve the edges of that, and that didn't seem like Mrs. Wilberforce, so I moved to a trapezoid and also had the problems with the curved edges. So I was experimenting with things and found that I could curve outlines, so that's what I'm showing right here. I've got an outline with a little bit of curve, and then the next triangle over, I expanded the outline and made it the same color, but then I had troubles with her blending in the background. So I added a similar shape behind her, and I showed it in orange there, but then the next one is the same thing, just in white, so that she'd have another outline. And then I did the same thing with the trapezoid, but I didn't like that so much, so I moved over to the triangle. Here's my generic shapes for the criminals. I wanted to have them be pointed. For Professor Marcus, I used just the upside down triangle because he was the one that was mentally unstable, I guess. And then Louis, I used the upside down trapezoid because he was the experienced gangster and was a little bit more stable. Mr. Robinson, I used a similar shape because he was kind of looking up to Louis. Major Courtney, for Major Courtney and Mr. Lawson, I used the rectangle because they were both kind of bigger men. And for Major Courtney, I added the bow tie to distinguish him. And then for Mr. Lawson, I just made him a little bit bigger and made his head smaller because he wasn't the brains, he was just the muscle. For my first scene, I was choosing to do the scene where the crew was moving out of the house. So I just set up a setting and introduced the main characters that I wanted in the scene. Then I moved to making the lines crooked, adding a window and a crooked picture, and I thickened the lines so that it would seem more like, or it was more obvious that it was her house. I was relating the color to her. I then moved the men into the position that I wanted, and added the crate they were carrying. I had problems, like, I looked at the scene and I couldn't tell if they were going in or out, so I added Louis with a smaller box to kind of be in a line heading out of the house. But I still had problems with telling which way they were going, so I tilted those three men forward and then added Mrs. Wilberforce and Professor talking because she was just kind of there in the way the entire time. For my next scene, I just started the same way, introducing the main characters I wanted in the scene and setting up my setting. And then I set it up similar to the last scene. And in this scene, I wanted to show Mrs. Wilberforce and talking to the professor when she was stepping on a scarf. So I put them into place and set up my scene. And then I just kind of started messing around with how I wanted the scarf to look. And I used trapezoids because I wanted the scarf to be really like stretching. So I just messed around with that, and then here's my final second scene. And I decided to lean Professor Marcus back to make it really seem like he was straining to get out the door. And I made sure that his shoulder was out the door so it was really obvious where he was going. And I also added Mr. Lawson with his instrument because he was the last to go out, and then put the rest of the gang outside the window to show that they were waiting to go. For the next scene, I started again just mapping out the setting and with main characters that I wanted. This is the scene where he gets the case stuck in the door. So I added the details to the house and scaled him down to be more back there, like near the house. And I also wanted to have the rest of the crew in here kind of waiting. but I just kept them out of the way because I wasn't too sure what I wanted with them yet. So then I moved to adding a horizon line so it didn't just seem like everything was floating. And I put his case in the door because Mrs. Wilberforce has been holding them back the entire time. And then now Mrs. Wilberforce is not in the scene, but her house is holding them. And I wanted it to be really obvious, like the house is pulling on the instrument case and physically holding them back. And I tilted Mr. Lawson back to make it seem like he was pulling really hard. Then I added the car for the crew to be waiting in because they were all ready to go and he was just back there pulling on the instrument case. But I felt that there needed to be one more thing, and that was the little squares sticking out of the instrument case. And that symbolizes the money in a way, but it's more like their secret, I guess. Like throughout this scene, their secret was seeping out of this instrument case because as he's pulling on this, the instrument case is going under a lot of strain, and it eventually breaks open. But throughout these three scenes, I've made all of their objects gray with a red background, but I made the money red with a gray background, so that it really relates to them. Like that's what they are all about, that secret that's inside of that case. So that's my final scene for the third one. And here's 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, Zach.
Overall, I thought it was really good. The one thing I would change would just be the shape of the case, because the whole time I thought it was a cannon.
This case over here?
The instrument case.
Oh, okay, yeah. Alright. Yeah, Maria?
I really enjoyed your use of color. I like how you used gray instead of black, and compared to some of the other ones, I like how light it is and how it isn't darkened too much by black due to your use of gray. So I really like that.
It's a very comic interlude too in the film, and so the lightness of the colors works well here, and it strikes us as very original because we haven't seen it before. It's not to say that these are the perfect colors for every part of the film or anything, but they work very well here.
Oh, yeah, same.
I think that the leading did what you wanted it to do. I think it really helped show the direction of where they're going. But in the third scene, with the money, you can't really tell it's money. I mean, is there any other color that you can make it, like white maybe?
Well, white might not do it either, but I think you're right. That's what I want to see. I want that part to be clearer. And I'm wondering if, well, does anybody else see another way you might get the emphasis you need there?
You could probably, I don't know, like make a border like around the inside of your rectangle and like have like a circle in the middle of them. You know, like how it has that
Yeah.
make a border.
But to be able to see that well, I'm wondering if we could just shorten the distance between the house and the car, just bring the house up a little closer, or bring the car in or something, so that you're allowed to enlarge Mr. Lawson in that case a little bit,
Okay.
and we can get a more accurate sense of that there. I think we all know what it is because we've seen the film and are very familiar with the film. We've all studied the film to a certain extent. But for someone who maybe only seen the film once or whatever, it might be a little confusing that you're trying to show money there. And it is important, as you say. You really understand this film, and one of the key images in the film is that scarf scene, which is just so hysterical when you take it, just think of it in itself. that she is actually impeding their getaway again. You know, it's a repeat of the umbrella scene where she has to go back, et cetera, et cetera. She's just totally, she's just doing it, and it's totally accidental on her part. There's no intent at all other than to be friendly to these guys, to be the good landlady, and to say how much she regrets having them leave. And that scarf scene is really a gem, it really is. I think the only thing on that one that I might be tempted to have you do is maybe bring them just a tad closer, because, and maybe by moving her over just a little bit, because she's really on top of that scarf and it's practically strangling him to pull away, but he's still trying to pull away, and the notion that his escape will kill him, you know, by strangling him is very strong there when you see that scarf tighten up around him. Very well done, very well done. Any other comments or questions, things that can be tweaked or you want to explain? I think one thing that Kelsey didn't mention with his characters, but it was a wonderful touch, was you rounded Mr. Lawson's shape. He was big, but you rounded his corners off.
I also rounded Major Courtney's slightly because when it was square, he just kind of seemed to be an object in the background. But you're right about that. Like he was the softer character. So.
Yes, he's the softie. He's the one that actually has in him much more of a conscience, a sense of what civilization demands of us. Oddly enough, you've got a crazy professor who's just completely out of this world. I mean, he's the mad scientist type, only it's the mad criminal. And you've got a bunch of other guys, you know, that in Louis' case, he's just turned evil, you know, but it's Mr. Lawson who's on the borderline to being a real member of society, and softening him is very important there. Any other questions or comments? Very good job.